The vultures circled overhead like black omens against the merciless blue sky, and Preston Lawson knew those birds never flew lazy circles without good reason. He reined in his chestnut mare and squinted across the vast expanse of New Mexico prairie. The June heat of 1878 shimmering off the grass in waves that made the horizon dance. What he saw through that distortion made his blood run cold. 3 figures stumbling in the distance, their movements erratic and desperate, heading in exactly the wrong direction away from any water source or settlement. Preston clicked his tongue and urged his horse forward, his hand instinctively checking the canteen at his hip. 23 years of living in this unforgiving territory had taught him that people wandering the prairie in this condition rarely lasted another day. As he drew closer, he realized with growing alarm that all 3 figures were women, their fine traveling dresses now torn and dusty, their exposed skin burned red from the relentless sun. "Madam," he called out, spurring his horse to a gallop. "Madam, you're heading the wrong way." The tallest of the 3 women turned at his voice, and even from a distance, Preston could see the moment hope flickered in her face. She raised one trembling hand to shield her eyes, then promptly collapsed to her knees. The other 2 women stopped walking, swaying on their feet like wheat stalks in a strong wind. Preston dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, grabbing his canteen and rushing to the woman who had fallen. Up close, she was younger than he had first thought, perhaps 20 or 21, with auburn hair that had escaped its pins and cascaded around her face. Her green eyes were glazed with exhaustion and dehydration, but there was a fierce intelligence in them that even this ordeal had not dimmed. "Easy now," he said gently, supporting her head as he brought the canteen to her lips. "Small sips, not too much at once or you'll be sick." She obeyed, though he could feel her trembling with the effort to restrain herself. When he pulled the canteen away, she gasped, "My sisters. Please help my sisters." Preston looked up at the other 2 women. One appeared to be in her late 20s, with hair so blonde it was nearly white, her face pale beneath the sunburn. The younger one couldn't have been more than 18, dark-haired and delicate-featured, tears streaming down her cheeks as she stared at her fallen sister. "I've got them," Preston assured her, then moved to help the other 2. He gave them each water, careful to regulate the amount despite their desperate need. "What happened? Where's your wagon, your escort?" The auburn-haired woman he had helped first struggled to sit up, her voice hoarse but determined. "Our wagon broke an axle 2 days ago. Our driver, Mr. Henderson, he went to find help, said there was a town not far, but he never came back. We waited until this morning, then decided to walk. We thought we were following the trail, but everything looks the same out here." Preston felt a chill despite the heat. 2 days without proper shelter in this weather, probably rationing whatever water they had in the wagon until they decided to leave, then walking in this heat with nothing. Mr. Henderson probably got lost himself. This prairie can confuse even experienced travelers. The town he was looking for is Tucumcari, but it's a good 15 miles from here, and you ladies were walking away from it. The youngest one let out a sob. "We're going to die out here." "No, you're not," Preston said firmly. "My name is Preston Lawson. I've been working the cattle trails around here for 6 years. I know every water hole and landmark for 50 miles. I'll get you to Tucumcari safely, but we need to move smart. It's past noon now and the heat is only getting worse." "Can you ride?" The blonde woman shook her head. "We've never ridden anything but in carriages." Preston considered their situation. His mare could carry one of them, maybe 2 if they were small, but 3 was impossible. "Then we walk, but not now. We find shade, rest through the worst of the heat, and travel in the evening when it's cooler." There's an outcropping about 2 miles south with some decent shade. Can you make it that far? The auburn-haired woman nodded, using his arm to pull herself to her feet. We can make it. We have to. She looked at him directly, and Preston felt something shift in his chest. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her gaze, a determination that matched his own stubborn will to survive in this harsh land. "What's your name?" he asked, surprised to find himself genuinely wanting to know. "Catherine Kensington," she replied. "This is my older sister, Clara, and my younger sister, Emma. We were traveling from St. Louis to meet our uncle in Santa Fe. He has a ranch there, promised our father he would give us a new start after." She trailed off, and Preston saw shadows in her eyes that spoke of recent loss. "Well, Miss Kensington, let's focus on getting you to that new start. This way." He offered his arm to Catherine, then helped Clara mount his horse. Emma walked on his other side, and they began the slow journey south. Preston kept up a steady conversation, partly to keep their minds off their discomfort and partly because he found himself fascinated by Catherine Kensington. They were from a good family, he learned, their father a banker who had died 6 months earlier from pneumonia. Their mother had passed years before, and with no male relatives in St. Louis and mounting debts from medical expenses, their uncle's invitation had been a lifeline they desperately needed. "We sold almost everything," Catherine told him, her voice growing stronger as the water revived her. "These dresses are practically the last nice things we own. I know we must look ridiculous out here in silk and lace." "You look like you've been through hell," Preston said honestly, "but you're still walking, still fighting. That's not ridiculous. That's courage." Catherine glanced at him, something flickering in her expression that made his heart beat faster. "You're kind to say so, Mr. Lawson." "Preston," he corrected. "Out here, formality seems a bit silly." "Then you must call me Catherine." She smiled, and despite the cracked lips and sunburned cheeks, it transformed her face into something that took his breath away. They reached the outcropping as the sun beat down with its full fury. The rock formation jutted up from the prairie like the weathered bones of some ancient giant, creating blessed pools of shadow beneath. Preston helped the women settle into the coolest spot, then unsaddled his horse and used the blanket to create additional shade. "Rest now," he instructed. "I'm going to scout around, see if I can find anything useful. I'll be back within the hour." Emma grabbed his sleeve, fear in her young eyes. "You'll come back. You promise?" Preston knelt down to her level, his voice gentle. "I promise, Miss Emma. I didn't ride out here just to abandon you ladies. You have my word." He left them his canteen and rifle, taking only his knife and his sense of direction. The prairie seemed empty, but Preston knew better. He found what he was looking for half a mile away, a prairie dog colony with the telltale signs of a nearby water seep. It wasn't much, but enough to refill their canteen and give them a fighting chance. When he returned, the sisters were huddled together in the shade, and he heard the soft murmur of their voices. Catherine was singing something, low and sweet, while Emma rested her head on her lap. Clara kept watch, and she straightened when she saw Preston approach. "There's water not far from here," he announced. "Not much, but enough. I'll refill the canteen. We'll rest here until sunset, then make for Tucumcari. If we travel through the night, we should reach it by dawn." "Travel at night?" Clara asked nervously. "What about animals? Indians?" Preston settled down against the rock, tipping his hat over his eyes. "The Comanche moved through this area years ago, and most have been pushed onto reservations. As for animals, that's why I gave you the rifle. But honestly, the biggest danger out here is the heat and the distance." "Night travel is safer." Catherine shifted, and Preston opened one eye to find her watching him. "Why did you help us, Preston? You could have ridden on." It was a fair question. Preston considered it carefully. My mother used to say that the measure of a man is what he does when nobody's watching. But truthfully, I don't think I could have ridden past. Wouldn't have been able to sleep at night, wondering. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was, Preston agreed quietly. She and my father died of cholera 10 years back. Taught me everything I know about surviving out here first, though. They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that didn't need filling with meaningless words. Preston found himself acutely aware of Catherine's presence, the way she gently stroked Emma's hair, the furrow of concentration on her brow as she thought about whatever occupied her mind. He had known plenty of women in his life, dance hall girls in Tucumcari, the daughters of ranchers, even a schoolteacher who had tried to reform his wandering ways. But none of them had affected him quite like this dusty, sunburned woman who hummed lullabies to her frightened sister in the shadow of a rock. As the afternoon wore on, Preston dozed lightly, years of sleeping rough having taught him to rest while staying alert. When he woke, the sun was painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple. Catherine sat nearby, watching the sunset with an expression of such longing that Preston felt it like a physical ache. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said softly. She startled, then smiled. "I was just thinking that despite everything, despite how terrified I've been, this land has a harsh beauty to it. The sky seems bigger here than anywhere I've ever been." "It gets in your blood," Preston admitted. "I went back east once to Kansas City. Stayed a week before I couldn't stand it anymore. Too many buildings blocking the view, too many people crowded together. Out here you can breathe." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I hope I learn to feel that way. Right now it just feels like it's trying to kill us." "It is," Preston said honestly. "This land doesn't care about your plans or your hopes, but if you learn to respect it, to work with it instead of against it, it gives back. Not easily, never easily, but it gives back." She met his eyes and something passed between them, unspoken but profound. Preston felt it settle into his chest, warm and terrifying at once. As the last light faded, they prepared to move. The women were stiff and sore, but the rest and water had revived them considerably. Preston fashioned a rough torch from dried grass and a strip of cloth soaked in oil from his saddle bag, though he didn't light it yet. The moon would be bright enough once it rose. They set out across the prairie, walking in a tight group with Preston leading his horse and setting the pace. The temperature dropped quickly once the sun set, and Preston heard Emma's teeth chattering. He stopped and pulled off his coat, draping it around her thin shoulders despite her protests. "I'll be fine, Miss Emma. I'm used to this weather." Clara walked alongside the horse, occasionally gripping the saddle for support. Catherine stayed near Preston, and he found himself shortening his stride to match hers, their arms occasionally brushing in the darkness. Each touch sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with static electricity. "Tell me about Tucumcari," Catherine said as they walked. "What's it like?" Preston considered. "It's not much of a town yet, maybe 200 people on a good day. Started as a camp for railroad workers back in '73. Now it's trying to become a proper town, got a general store, a boarding house, a saloon, a church, and a handful of houses. People there are rough but decent for the most part. They'll help you get a stage to Santa Fe." "Have you lived there long?" "I don't really live anywhere," Preston admitted. "I work cattle drives mostly, taking herds north to Colorado and Wyoming. When I'm not on the trail, I do odd jobs around Tucumcari, sometimes work as a guide for wagon trains. I've got a room I rent at the boarding house when I'm in town, but I'm on the move more often than not." Catherine was quiet, and Preston wondered what she was thinking. Did his rootless life seem exciting or just sad to a woman who had clearly come from stability and refinement? "Don't you get lonely?" she finally asked. The question caught him off guard. Sometimes, he admitted, but it's the life I know. I'm not sure I'd be any good at settling down. I think you might surprise yourself. Catherine's voice was soft in the darkness. My father always said that people don't really know what they want until they find it. Preston didn't know how to respond to that, so he stayed quiet. But her words echoed in his mind, mixing with the growing realization that something was happening between them, something that defied the logic of their brief acquaintance. The moon rose, full and bright, turning the prairie into a silver sea. They walked for hours, stopping occasionally to rest and drink. Emma's spirits improved as the fear of the previous days began to fade, replaced by the growing certainty of survival. Clara remained quiet, but Preston caught her watching him with an assessing gaze that made him think she saw more than he wanted to reveal. Around midnight, Emma began to limp. Preston examined her feet and found blisters rubbed raw through her thin shoes. Without a word, he lifted her onto his horse, adjusting the stirrups so she could rest her feet while Clara held the reins and walked alongside. "You're very good at this," Catherine observed as they resumed walking. "Taking care of people." Preston shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what needs doing." "No," Catherine insisted. "It's more than that. You could have taken us to that outcropping, left us with water and directions, and been on your way hours ago. Instead, you've sacrificed your own comfort and time to make sure we get there safely." "That's not just necessity. That's character." Preston felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with exertion. "You don't know me well enough to judge my character, Miss Catherine, don't I?" She smiled in the moonlight. "I think extreme circumstances reveal character rather quickly. In the past 8 hours, I've seen you be patient, kind, resourceful, and selfless. What more do I need to know? You need to know that I'm broke more often than not, that I've got a temper when provoked, that I've lived rough for so long I barely remember what it's like to sleep in a real bed more than a few nights running. You need to know that this land has made me hard, Catherine, and there are parts of me that might not be as noble as you're imagining right now." Catherine stopped walking, forcing Preston to stop as well. Clara and Emma continued a few paces ahead with the horse before realizing and halting. Catherine looked up at Preston, her green eyes luminous in the moonlight. "I need to know if you feel this too," she said quietly. "This thing between us. Or am I imagining it because you saved my life and I'm grateful?" Preston's heart hammered in his chest. He could lie, brush it off, and probably should. But looking at Catherine Kensington, dusty and exhausted and still the most compelling woman he had ever met, he found he couldn't. "You're not imagining it," he said roughly. "And it scares the hell out of me because I met you 8 hours ago and I shouldn't feel like this." Catherine's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers threading through his. "I'm scared too, but maybe being scared is how you know it matters." They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, the prairie wind whispering around them. Then Clara called softly, "Is everything all right?" Catherine squeezed Preston's hand once before letting go. "Everything's fine. We should keep moving." They walked on, but everything had changed. Preston felt hyper-aware of Catherine beside him, the space between them charged with possibility. They talked more as they walked, sharing stories from their vastly different lives. She told him about growing up in St. Louis, about piano lessons and social calls, about the devastation of watching her father fade away while creditors circled like those vultures on the prairie. He told her about learning to rope cattle, about the time he got caught in a flash flood and nearly drowned, about the vast spaces and the freedom that came with a life unbound by expectations. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky, the scattered buildings of Tucumcari appeared on the horizon. Emma let out a cry of relief, and even Clara's stern face softened. But Preston felt an unexpected reluctance settle over him. Reaching town meant this journey would end, and he wasn't ready for that. The town was just stirring to life as they arrived. Preston led them straight to the boarding house, where Mrs. Margaret Thornton, the proprietress, took one look at the bedraggled women and immediately bustled into action. She clucked over their condition like a mother hen, ordered hot water for baths, and began preparing rooms. "I'll send for Dr. Phillips," she declared. "Those burns need tending, and Lord knows what else you've suffered. Preston Lawson, you did a good thing bringing them in. Just happened to be riding by at the right time, Mrs. Thornton." Preston shifted uncomfortably under the older woman's approving gaze. "Divine providence, more like," Mrs. Thornton said firmly. "Now, you girls come with me. Preston, you go get some rest yourself. You look dead on your feet." Preston started to leave, but Catherine caught his arm. "Wait. Will I see you again?" "I'm not going anywhere just yet," Preston assured her. "I need to organize a search party, see if we can find your wagon and your driver, and you'll need proper supplies and arrangements for the stage to Santa Fe." Catherine's face fell slightly at the mention of Santa Fe, but she nodded. "Thank you, Preston, for everything." Preston touched the brim of his hat, suddenly awkward. "Rest well, Catherine." He walked out into the morning sun, his body exhausted but his mind racing. He should feel satisfied he had done a good deed, saved 3 lives, and earned the gratitude of the community. Instead, he felt hollow, like something vital had been carved out of his chest. Over the next 3 days, Preston threw himself into practical matters. He organized a search party and found the abandoned wagon 10 miles northwest of where he had encountered the women. Mr. Henderson's body lay another mile beyond that, his neck broken from a fall off his horse. They brought back what salvageable belongings remained in the wagon and gave Henderson a proper burial in Tucumcary's small cemetery. Preston checked on the Kensington sisters each day, ostensibly to update them on the search and help arrange their travel. But truly, he came to see Catherine. They fell into a pattern of long conversations on the boarding house porch, talking about everything and nothing. Clara watched them with increasing concern, while Emma seemed delighted by what she called their romance. "You shouldn't encourage him, Catherine," Clara said one evening after Preston had left. "We have no money, no prospects. We're dependent on Uncle Robert's charity. What can you possibly offer a man like Preston Lawson?" "I haven't offered him anything," Catherine replied, though her cheeks colored. "We're just friends." "Friends don't look at each other the way you two do," Emma chimed in. "He's in love with you, Catherine. Anyone can see it." Catherine's heart raced at the words, but she forced herself to be practical. Even if that were true, what would it matter? We're leaving for Santa Fe in 3 days when the stage comes through. Preston has his own life here. But doubt had crept into her voice, and all 3 sisters heard it. That night, Preston sat in the saloon nursing a whiskey and trying not to think about Catherine leaving. His friend Jack Morrison, a fellow drover, slid onto the stool beside him. "Heard you've been courting one of those women you rescued," Jack said with a grin. "The pretty one with the red hair." "I haven't been courting anyone," Preston said shortly. "Just helping them get sorted." Jack snorted. "Sure you are, and I'm the King of England, Preston. I've known you 6 years. I've never seen you like this over a woman." Preston drained his glass, savoring the burn. "Doesn't matter how I am." "She's leaving in 3 days. Then go with her." The suggestion hit Preston like a physical blow. "What? You heard me. Go with her. You've been talking for months about maybe settling down, finding a piece of land to call your own. Maybe this is your chance." "I barely know her, Jack." "And she's educated, refined. What would she want with a saddle tramp like me?" Jack leveled him with a serious look. "From what I hear, she wants plenty, but you're too scared to find out. Look, Preston, this life we lead, it's fine when you're young and free. But there comes a time when a man needs more than just the trail and a whiskey at the end of it. Maybe that time is now for you." Preston left the saloon with Jack's words ringing in his ears. He walked through the quiet streets of Tucumcari, his mind churning. Could he do it? Could he give up the freedom of the trail for the uncertainty of building something permanent? And more importantly, would Catherine even want him if he offered? The next day, Preston arrived at the boarding house to find Catherine sitting alone on the porch, staring out at the prairie. She looked melancholy, her usual spark dimmed. "Your sister's all right?" Preston asked, settling into the chair beside her. "They are fine. Clara's writing letters to Uncle Robert and Emma's helping Mrs. Thornton in the kitchen. I just needed some air." Catherine turned to him and Preston saw the shimmer of tears in her eyes. "Preston, I don't want to go to Santa Fe," his heart stuttered. "Why not? Your uncle is expecting you. Because everything I want is here." Catherine's voice broke. "And I'm terrified that I'm being foolish, that I'm throwing away security for something that might not even be real. But Preston, when I'm with you, I feel more alive than I ever have. These past few days, talking with you, learning about your life, it's shown me that the existence I had in St. Louis, the one I thought I wanted back, that's not living. That's just going through motions." Preston's hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles went white. "Catherine, I have nothing to offer you. No house, no steady income, no guarantees. Hell, I'm not even sure I know how to be the kind of man you deserve." "You're exactly the kind of man I deserve," Catherine said fiercely. "You're brave and kind and honest. You don't pretend to be something you're not. And I don't need guarantees, Preston. I need someone who makes me want to be brave too." Preston stood abruptly, pacing the length of the porch. Everything in him wanted to reach for her, to promise her everything, but doubt held him back. "What about your sisters? Clara's right that you have no money. At least your uncle can provide for you. We'll write to Uncle Robert, explain the situation. Clara and Emma can still go to him. I'm 21, old enough to make my own choices." Catherine stood as well, crossing to where Preston had stopped at the porch railing. "Unless you don't want me. If that's the case, tell me now and I'll get on that stage and never trouble you again." Preston turned to face her, and whatever she saw in his expression made her breath catch. "Not want you? Catherine, I've been half in love with you since you looked up at me with those green eyes and asked me to help your sisters before yourself. I'm fully in love with you now, and it's terrifying because I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be someone you can depend on." "Then we'll figure it out together." Catherine reached for his hands, holding them tightly. "I'm not asking for perfection, Preston. I'm just asking for a chance." Preston pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her hair. She smelled of soap and sunshine, and holding her felt like coming home to a place he had never known he was searching for. "I want to do this right," he said roughly. "Court you properly, give you time to be sure. There's a piece of land about 20 miles east of here, near a good water source. The owner died last year and his widow is looking to sell cheap. I've been saving money, not much, but enough for a down payment. I could build us a house there, start a small ranch. It wouldn't be easy, Catherine. The work would be hard and there would be times we'd struggle, but it would be ours." Catherine pulled back to look at him, her eyes shining. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Lawson?" "I suppose I am," Preston said, his voice rough with emotion. "Though I'm making a mess of it. Catherine Kensington, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life with me out here in this beautiful, terrible land?" "Yes," Catherine breathed. "Yes, absolutely yes." Preston kissed her then, there on Mrs. Thornton's boarding house porch in the middle of the afternoon. It was tender and fierce at once, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We should tell your sisters," Catherine laughed, the sound bright with joy. "Clara's going to have opinions." She was right. Clara's face went through a remarkable range of emotions when they made their announcement: shock, concern, disapproval, and finally, grudging acceptance as she watched the way Preston and Catherine looked at each other. "You're certain about this?" Clara asked Catherine, pulling her aside. "You barely know him, and this life will be nothing like what we grew up with." "I'm certain," Catherine said firmly. "Clara, I know you're trying to protect me and I love you for it, but this is right. I feel it in my bones." Emma, predictably, was ecstatic. "I knew it. I knew from the first day that you two were meant for each other." "Oh, Catherine, you're going to be so happy." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. Clara and Emma did travel to Santa Fe to stay with their uncle, who sent his blessing and a modest wedding gift when Catherine wrote to explain the situation. Preston purchased the land he had spoken of and began the hard work of building a house. Catherine stayed at the boarding house, spending her days helping Mrs. Thornton and her evenings with Preston, planning their future. They were married in early August in Tucumcary's small church, with most of the town in attendance. Catherine wore a simple dress that Mrs. Thornton had helped her sew, and Preston wore a new suit that made him tug uncomfortably at the collar. But when Catherine walked down the aisle and he saw her face glowing with happiness, all his discomfort melted away. "I love you," he whispered as they joined hands at the altar. "I love you too," Catherine whispered back. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, speaking of the unexpected ways that love finds people and the courage it takes to build a life together. When Preston kissed his bride, the congregation cheered, and Preston felt something settle deep in his soul, a sense of rightness, of finally being exactly where he was meant to be. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house, in the same room where Catherine had first recovered from her ordeal on the prairie. In the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, Catherine traced the calluses on Preston's hands. "No regrets?" Preston asked softly. "Not a single one." Catherine kissed him, slow and sweet. "This is just the beginning, Preston, our beginning." The house took 3 months to complete. It was modest, 2 rooms to start, with plans to add more as they could afford it, but it was sturdy and well built, with a porch that faced west so they could watch the sunsets. Preston worked himself nearly to exhaustion, determined to have it ready before winter. Catherine helped when she could, learning skills she had never imagined needing: how to mix mortar, how to choose good timber, how to make a house into a home with limited resources and unlimited determination. Clara and Emma visited in late October, arriving with Uncle Robert, who turned out to be a jovial man in his 50s with a weathered face and kind eyes. "So you're the cowboy who stole my niece's heart," Robert said, shaking Preston's hand with a grip that still had strength in it. "I had plans for her, you know. Thought I'd introduce her to some of the young ranchers around Santa Fe." "I apologize for disrupting those plans, sir," Preston said carefully. Robert laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Don't apologize, son. I can see Catherine's happy, and that's all that matters. Though I have to say, when she wrote me about meeting you because you rescued her and her sisters from dying on the prairie, I thought it sounded like something from a dime novel." "Sometimes life is stranger than fiction," Catherine said, sliding her arm through Preston's. They spent 3 days showing their family the life they were building. Robert was impressed by the house and the land, offering advice on ranching that Preston gratefully accepted. Clara seemed to relax as she saw Catherine's genuine happiness, and Emma couldn't stop talking about how romantic it all was. The night before they left, Clara pulled Catherine aside. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "I thought you were being reckless, throwing away your future. But I can see now that you were running toward it. Preston's a good man, Catherine, better than most. I'm happy for you." Catherine hugged her sister tightly. "Thank you. That means everything to me." Winter came harsh that year, but Preston and Catherine weathered it together. They learned each other's rhythms, their habits and quirks. Preston discovered that Catherine sang when she cooked, and that she could make even their simple provisions taste like a feast. Catherine learned that Preston had nightmares sometimes about the hardships he had endured, and that he slept better when she held him close. They worked side by side, building not just a house but a life. Preston taught Catherine to ride properly, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman. Catherine taught Preston to read better, expanding his education beyond the basics he had learned as a boy. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Catherine reading aloud from the few books they owned while Preston carved or mended tack. In late February, Catherine woke feeling ill. Mrs. Thornton, visiting to bring supplies, took one look at her and smiled knowingly. "I'd say congratulations are in order," she said gently. "You're with child, dear." Catherine's hand went to her stomach, wonder and fear warring in her expression. "Are you certain?" "Certain as I can be without the doctor confirming, but I've seen enough women in your condition to know the signs." When Catherine told Preston that evening, he went very still. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Catherine, we're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, suddenly uncertain. Preston pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears tracking down his weathered cheeks. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, overwhelmed, grateful beyond words, all of that. "But yes, Catherine, I'm happy. So damn happy." Dr. Phillips confirmed the pregnancy the following week, estimating the baby would arrive in late September or early October. Preston threw himself into preparations with the same intensity he had brought to building the house, adding another room and building a cradle from smooth pine wood. Catherine blossomed with pregnancy, her face glowing with health and happiness. She wrote long letters to her sisters, filling them with details of her life. Clara sent back practical advice and baby clothes she had sewn, while Emma's letters were full of excitement and questions. Summer brought the hard work of establishing their ranch. Preston had purchased a small herd of cattle with money he had saved and a loan from Robert, who had insisted on helping his niece and her husband get established. Catherine helped where she could, though Preston was increasingly protective, worrying about her exerting herself. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Catherine told him one evening when he had insisted she rest instead of helping with the evening chores. But she said it with love, touched by his concern. On a warm evening in late September, 2 days before their first wedding anniversary, Catherine went into labor. Preston rode like the devil himself to fetch Dr. Phillips and Mrs. Thornton, then paced the porch like a caged animal while the women tended to his wife. The labor was long and difficult. Preston heard Catherine cry out and had to force himself not to burst into the room. Mrs. Thornton finally emerged near dawn, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son, Preston, a healthy, strong boy," and Catherine came through it like a champion. Preston barely heard the rest, rushing past her to where Catherine lay exhausted in their bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at him, her face pale but radiant. "Preston, meet your son." Preston approached slowly, almost reverently. The baby was tiny, red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair. As Preston watched, the infant opened his eyes green like Catherine's and let out a lusty cry. "He's perfect," Preston breathed, carefully touching one tiny fist. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb, and Preston felt his heart crack wide open. "What should we name him?" Catherine smiled. "I thought perhaps Paul, after your father, Paul Lawson." Preston kissed her forehead, then his son's. "Paul Lawson, I like that very much." The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Preston discovered reserves of patience he hadn't known he possessed, walking the floor with Paul when he cried, changing diapers, and marveling at every tiny change in his son. Catherine navigated motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning as she went and finding joy even in the exhaustion. Clara and Emma arrived in November for a lengthy visit, bringing Uncle Robert and his wife, Aunt Sarah. The small house was cramped with so many people, but filled with laughter and family warmth. Robert took Preston aside one evening. "I have a proposition for you," the older man said. "I'm not getting any younger and managing the ranch is getting harder. I'd like to propose a partnership. You and Catherine would still have this place, but you'd also help me run my operation. The profits would be split, and when I die, the ranch would go to Catherine and her sisters equally." Preston was stunned. "Sir, that's incredibly generous, but nothing," Robert interrupted. "You're family now, Preston. And more than that, you're a good man and a hard worker. I trust you. Think about it, discuss it with Catherine, but know that the offer stands." Preston and Catherine talked long into the night after everyone had gone to bed. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it would mean splitting their time between their ranch and Santa Fe, a significant change to the life they had built. "What do you want to do?" Catherine asked, nursing Paul while they talked quietly in the darkness. Preston considered. "I want to do what's best for our family. This ranch can support us, but it'll always be a struggle. Robert's offer would give us security, a better future for Paul and any other children we might have, but I don't want you to feel like we're giving up our independence." Catherine smiled. "We're not giving up anything. We're gaining opportunity. And Preston, I miss my family. The idea of being closer to my sisters, of Paul growing up knowing his cousins, that matters to me." They accepted Robert's offer, and the next few years fell into a rhythm. They spent half the year at their ranch near Tucumcari, and half the year helping Robert with his larger operation near Santa Fe. It was hard work, but it was also rewarding. Preston's knowledge of cattle and the land proved invaluable, and Robert came to rely on him more and more. In the spring of 1881, Catherine gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Patricia. She had Preston's dark hair and his stubborn chin, and from the moment she could toddle, she followed her father everywhere. Paul, now 2, took his role as big brother seriously, always trying to help with his baby sister. That summer, Emma married a young lawyer in Santa Fe, and the whole family celebrated. Clara, surprisingly, remained unmarried, having developed a passion for teaching and opened a small school on Robert's ranch. She seemed content with her life, though Catherine sometimes wondered if her sister was lonely. The years passed, marked by the rhythms of ranching life and the growth of their children. Preston and Catherine's partnership deepened into something richer than mere love. It became a profound understanding, a knowledge of each other that needed no words. They could communicate with glances across a crowded room, could anticipate each other's needs and thoughts. In 1883, their third child arrived, another son they named Peter. Robert, now in his 60s, began stepping back from the daily operations of his ranch, leaving more and more responsibility to Preston. When Robert died peacefully in his sleep in 1885, Preston had become so integral to the ranch's operation that the transition was smooth. As Robert had promised, the ranch was left to his 3 nieces equally. Emma's husband managed the legal aspects, Clara continued running her school, and Catherine and Preston managed the land and cattle. Their own ranch near Tucumcari remained a place they visited regularly, a reminder of where they had started and what they had built together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Preston and Catherine stood on the porch of the Santa Fe ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Paul was 8 now, Patricia 6, and Peter 3. The sound of the children's laughter drifted from inside where Clara was supervising their dinner. "You ever regret it?" Preston asked, his arm around Catherine's waist. "Giving up the life you could have had for this one?" Catherine leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. "I regret nothing. Preston, you gave me something I never had in St. Louis, a purpose, a real life, a love that challenges and changes me. How could I regret that?" Preston kissed the top of her head. "I think about that day I found you and your sisters on the prairie, how close you came to dying out there. If I had ridden a different direction, if I had been an hour later, but you didn't and you weren't," Catherine interrupted. "We found each other, Preston. Against all the odds, in the middle of that vast prairie, we found each other. That's not chance. That's fate." Preston turned her to face him, his hands cradling her face. "I love you, Preston Lawson, more today than the day I married you, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." "And I love you," Catherine whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "My cowboy who saved my life and gave me a new one." They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon, wrapped in each other's arms, the warm breeze carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Inside, their children called for them, and they would go, ready to face whatever came next together. The Prairie had tried to take everything from Catherine that terrible day in June 1878. Instead, it had given her everything: a home, a family, and a love that would endure through all the years to come. Preston had set out that morning expecting an ordinary day of riding the range. He had found his destiny instead, in the form of 3 lost women and green eyes that saw through to his soul. Years later, when Paul was old enough to understand, Preston told him the story of how he had met his mother, leaving nothing out: the danger, the fear, the desperate walk across the prairie in the moonlight. "So you fell in love with Mama because you saved her?" Paul asked. Preston shook his head. "No, son. I fell in love with your mother because of who she was in that moment of crisis: brave, selfless, determined. The saving was just how we met. The loving that came from really seeing each other, from choosing each other every day since." It was a lesson Preston and Catherine lived and taught their children by example. Love wasn't just a feeling or a moment, it was a choice, made again and again through years of joy and hardship, through the mundane and the extraordinary. In 1890, at 45 years old, Catherine gave Preston one final surprise: twin daughters, Rose and Ruth. The older children, now teenagers and almost teenagers, were delighted with the babies. Preston, graying at the temples but still strong and vital, approached fatherhood at this age with more patience and less fear than he had with Paul. As he held his infant daughters, one in each arm, while Catherine rested, Preston marveled at the journey his life had taken. From a rootless cowboy with no ties and no plans beyond the next cattle drive, he had become a husband, father, and rancher, a man with deep roots and a legacy to pass on. Catherine recovered quickly from the birth, as she always did, and threw herself back into life with characteristic energy. She had become a pillar of the community, known for her kindness and her willingness to help anyone in need. More than one family struggling through hard times had found anonymous gifts on their doorstep, and Preston knew exactly where those gifts came from. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and paths. Paul proved to be a natural rancher like his father, already talking about taking over the operation someday. Patricia shocked everyone by developing a passion for medicine after helping Dr. Phillips with a difficult birth, and Preston and Catherine sent her east to study nursing. Peter showed talent with horses, training them with patience and skill that even Preston envied. The twins, as they grew, were inseparable and into everything, keeping their older siblings and parents constantly entertained. On a cool evening in October 1895, Preston and Catherine celebrated their 17th anniversary. The children had all gone to stay with Aunt Clara for the night, giving them rare privacy. They sat together on their porch swing, the same one Preston had built 17 years earlier, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You remember what you said to me that night on the prairie?" Catherine asked. "When I asked if you felt what I felt," Preston smiled, pulling her closer. "I said it scared the hell out of me because I met you 8 hours ago and I shouldn't feel like that. And now, after 17 years, Preston considered, his hand gently stroking her hair. "Now it still scares me sometimes how much I love you, how much my happiness depends on yours, but it's a good kind of scared if that makes sense. The kind that keeps you grateful, that makes you never take anything for granted." Catherine tilted her face up to his. "I understand completely. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and look at you and our children and this life we've built, and I can't believe it's real. That this is actually my life." "It's real," Preston assured her, kissing her softly. "As real as that prairie sun and those vultures circling overhead the day I found you. As real as your hand in mine when we walked through the night toward Tucumcari. As real as every moment we've shared since." They rocked gently in the swing, comfortable in the silence that had come with years of knowing each other. The ranch was quiet around them, peaceful in the gathering darkness. In the distance, a coyote called, and somewhere closer, cattle lowed softly. "I want to go back," Catherine said suddenly, "to that outcropping where we sheltered from the sun. You think you could find it again?" Preston thought about it. "Probably. It's been a long time, but I remember the landmarks. Why? I want to see it again with you. Want to stand in that place where I first started to fall in love with you and remember what it felt like. Would that be foolish?" "No," Preston said firmly. "Not foolish at all. We'll go next spring when the weather's good. Make an adventure of it, just the two of us." True to his word, in May of 1896, Preston and Catherine set out on horseback for a journey back to where their story had begun. Their children, now capable and responsible, managed things at the ranch. The ride took 3 days, and they camped under the stars, talking and laughing like the young people they had been when they first met. Preston found the outcropping with surprising ease, the rock formation unchanged by the passage of 18 years. They dismounted and stood in the shadow where Catherine and her sisters had sheltered from the merciless heat. "I remember being so scared," Catherine said softly, running her hand along the rough stone. "Scared we would die, scared we'd never find civilization again. But then you appeared like something out of a dream, and I knew somehow that everything would be all right." Preston came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, even dusty and sunburned and half dead from the heat. I remember the moment I looked in your eyes and felt something shift inside me, like a door opening that I hadn't even known was closed." Catherine turned in his arms, and Preston saw tears on her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not riding past that day. For stopping, for caring, for taking a chance on me." "Thank you," Preston countered, "for seeing something in a rootless cowboy worth building a life with, for being brave enough to choose this difficult, beautiful life. For giving me a family and a home and more love than I ever thought I deserved." They made love there in the shadow of the rocks, under the vast New Mexico sky, celebrating not just their love but their survival, the unlikely miracle of their meeting and the life they had built from that chance encounter. As they rode home, Catherine looked back once at the outcropping, watching it recede into the distance. "Goodbye," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was saying goodbye to, perhaps to the frightened girl she had been, perhaps to youth itself, or perhaps just to the beginning of their story, acknowledging that they had moved far beyond it into something richer and deeper. The years continued their steady march. Paul married a rancher's daughter and gave them grandchildren. Patricia finished her nursing training and returned to New Mexico to open a clinic. Peter started his own horse breeding operation on a portion of the family land. The twins, Rose and Ruth, went to teachers' college together, then returned to teach alongside their Aunt Clara. Preston aged gracefully, his hair going white but his body staying strong from years of hard work. Catherine's auburn hair gained threads of silver, and lines appeared around her eyes, but Preston thought she grew more beautiful with each passing year. They settled into the comfortable rhythms of older age, still working but also finding more time for each other, for quiet moments and shared memories. On a warm evening in June 1908, exactly 30 years after the day they met, Preston and Catherine sat on their porch surrounded by their extended family. Paul was there with his wife and 3 children. Patricia had brought her husband, a fellow doctor. Peter and his wife were expecting their first child. The twins, still unmarried but content with their teaching careers, helped serve the dinner Catherine had prepared. Emma had come from Santa Fe with her 4 children, and even Clara, now in her 60s, seemed happy and relaxed. As the sun set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and purple, Paul raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying over the assembled family. 30 years ago today, Dad found Mom and her sisters lost on the prairie. He saved their lives and in doing so made all of our lives possible. To the cowboy and his lady May, they have 30 more years together. Hear, hear, the family chorused, raising their glasses. Preston stood, pulling Catherine to her feet beside him. "I can't promise 30 more years," he said with a smile. "The good Lord and I might have different plans about that. But I can promise that however many days I have left, I'll spend every one of them grateful for the life we've built, for this family, for the woman who took a chance on a saddle tramp with more dreams than sense. And I can promise," Catherine added, her voice strong and clear, "that there's nowhere else I'd rather be, no other life I'd rather have lived than this one. Right here with all of you, with this man who taught me what it means to be truly alive." They kissed as the family applauded, and Preston felt the same jolt of electricity he had felt that first time on Mrs. Thornton's porch all those years ago. Some things, he thought, never changed. Some things only grew stronger with time. That night, after the family had dispersed to their various homes and accommodations, Preston and Catherine lay in their bed, the window open to let in the cool night breeze. "You think we've done right by them?" Catherine asked softly. "The children, I mean. Have we given them what they need?" Preston considered her question seriously. "We've given them love, a strong foundation, and the example of 2 people committed to each other and to family. We've given them roots and wings, a place to come home to and the courage to fly. What more can parents do? I suppose you're right." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "I just want them to be happy, Preston, to find what we found." "They will," Preston assured her. "Maybe not the same way we did, but they'll find their own paths. We've taught them how to love, Catherine. That's the most important gift we could give." Catherine nestled closer to him, and Preston held her, feeling the familiar weight and warmth of her body against his. 30 years, he marveled. 30 years since that day on the prairie. And every single day had been worth it, the struggles and the triumphs, the sorrows and the joys, all of it woven together into the tapestry of their life. As he drifted toward sleep, Preston thought back to the young man he had been, riding the prairie with no particular destination in mind, no ties, no responsibilities. That man wouldn't have recognized the person he had become, settled, domestic, surrounded by family. But that young man also hadn't known what it was like to be loved completely, to have children call him father, to build something lasting and good. Preston, Catherine's voice was drowsy, on the edge of sleep. Yes, love. If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still stop that day? Would you still help us? Preston's arms tightened around her. Every single time, he said firmly. In every lifetime, in every version of that day, I would stop. Because a life without you, Catherine, that's not a life worth living. She sighed contentedly, and within moments, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Preston lay awake a while longer, listening to the familiar night sounds of the ranch, the horses moving in their paddock, the distant call of an owl, the settling of the house around them. He thought about the strange paths life took, the unexpected turns that led to the most important destinations. He had set out that morning 30 years ago with no expectation beyond checking cattle and maybe shooting a rabbit for dinner. Instead, he had found his entire future, walking lost across the prairie in fancy dresses and determination. The prairie had tested them, tried to break them, but they had endured. They had taken what that harsh land offered and built something beautiful from it. They had created a family, a legacy, a love story that would be told to grandchildren and great-grandchildren in the years to come. As Preston finally drifted to sleep, his last conscious thought was one of profound gratitude for the vultures that had alerted him to trouble, for his curiosity that had led him to investigate, for Catherine's courage in trusting a stranger, and for every moment, good and bad, that had brought them to this perfect present. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, singing its endless song. The stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. And in a modest ranch house in New Mexico, a cowboy and the woman he had saved 30 years ago slept peacefully in each other's arms, their love story complete and perfect, exactly as it was meant to be from the moment their eyes first met under that unforgiving sky.